Welcome to Chapter 4, Defining the Project. You can see that there are several learning objectives, and one of the biggest ones is defining the project scope statement. We're also going to talk about organizational breakdown structure, or OBS, and a really huge aspect of project management is the WBS, learning objective number 4, something called the work breakdown structure. So, defining the scope is important. That's what you're trying to do. In the case of a course, that would be in the course outline. It's usually about a paragraph long. It can be a bit longer for other projects. We're going to establish the priorities and certainly talk about the work breakdown structure and the coding. So you need, with the project scope, to be clear as to what you're trying to accomplish. The goals need to be specific, tangible, and measurable, SMART. They need to be realistic and timely also. And it's to clearly define the deliverables. Otherwise, you deliver a project and say, here you are, and the customer says, that's not what I wanted. And you need to be clear at the start as to what is your purpose in your scope statement. So your scope statement checklist should include all of these: what the objective is, the description, justification, deliverables, milestones, technical requirements, limitations, and the acceptance criteria. In the projects I work on for McGraw-Hill or Pearson, we have all of these. It clearly states things like deliverables, milestones, timelines, limitations, exclusions, what the publisher will provide, what I'm supposed to provide, and it says very clearly, if they're not satisfied with my work, I don't get paid. So you can see the scope statement is usually short, 1 or 2 pages mainly. So it's a brief summary. I said for course outlines, they tend to be 2 paragraphs maybe. Project charter is the document that authorizes, you can see, the project manager to initiate the project. And you do have to be careful of something called scope creep. Scope creep is where projects tends to get bigger and bigger and bigger. An example on, say, and you've maybe seen this in your lives, where, say, your family decided to renovate the kitchen, and the new kitchen looks phenomenal. The problem is now the carpets in the hallways and down to the bathroom and into the living room look really dated. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you have to be very careful about adding extra features, if it's, say, software or say a car or something like this, or a cell phone for that matter. So one of the causes, or some of the causes, are poor requirement analysis, not involving users, finding out what they want. As you can see, underestimating the project complexity, and having lack of change control. What that means is you need to have documentation and a process for changing what your final product is. And then goal plating. So the 3 binds that we've talked about several times: time, cost, and scope. You need to pay attention to the constraints and the time constraint, the monetary constraint, and the scope, which you still have to have a customer that accepts the product. So here's again the 3 binds and the trade-offs, and a diagram showing you how the projects will affect the performance or enhance the project or be accepted by the customer. The work breakdown structure is best shown as a graphic. In this particular case, you get into more and more levels of detail until you get down to a work package. Normally, you would not get that far because you start winding up with things like too much detail is not good. So what you can usually do is go to about level 3 or maybe level 4 of the work breakdown structure, and it'll probably appear much more clear to you what this looks like when I show you an upcoming slide. And it helps the project manager understand what the tasks are. And so, again, when I personally do projects for McGraw-Hill and Pearson, we need to understand the technical requirements. I have to have certain versions of, say, Excel and access to other things like their specific website where they give me access to the draft versions of the textbook, etc. So this is what a work breakdown structure would look like for a tablet. Is the end product at level 1, level 2, see broken into hardware, the CPU, and more items. And then it breaks down into various levels, down until you get down to very small components. If any of you take supply chain, this will look a lot like a material requirements plan. So the work package is the lowest level. It cannot be broken down any further. And it just is the smallest component. But you have to be careful that you don't get too detailed, such as lift drywall, hit nail with hammer, things along that line. You might just go to the level of install drywall and then have the people who are professionals who know how to install drywall properly. Organizational breakdown structure identifies who is responsible for the work and who is responsible for each of the work packages. So in this particular case, you combine the two, the work breakdown structure with the organizational breakdown structure on the left, design, quality control testing, production, and outsourcing. And each one of the areas understands what they are responsible for. The coding system, I'll show you in a slide here. This is what it looks like. It's like legal documents. If you've ever seen a legal document, they go 1, 1.1, 1.111, etc. So you've got the hardware, which has the cameras, the speakers, the antenna, the CPU, which is broken down into the major areas of power supply, flash ROM, touchscreen, etc. Now, this gets into, you can see the work packages. Again, you have to be careful. You should include some of this. Not in your project, by the way. That's too much detail. Because I had one group one time had like 25 pages of work breakdown structure, and I hadn't even written the rest of the report. And the report was only supposed to be 30 pages. So I told them, hang on to that, because I didn't want them to lose all that work. But I also told them, don't go in it. You're going into way too much detail. So for your projects, when you do, if you're in a course where there's a project in it, you should go down to 1.1.1, and that's it. You don't need 4. That would be perfectly fine. The process breakdown structure is simply focused on the process for the projects. The waterfall method is an iterative method that is used in the software industry. I don't think most of you are going to go into that field, but it's just a methodology so that it's as you can see, it goes in waves. So here's the process breakdown structure, and it simply is a bit of a different way of looking at things. So you have the analysis, design, construction, testing, and rollout. And so it's more, although you go, because of the screen, you have to go back and forth. You have various levels, and then you go across from the analysis to the design to the construction. So that's the waterfall part of it. The responsibility matrix, which is important, it clearly identifies who is responsible for what, or what position is responsible for what activity. So you can see, and I would slightly disagree with the person who did this, in the fact that I wouldn't identify it by person, I would identify it by position. Just in case, say, Richard leaves the organization or gets a promotion, and Linda takes over from Richard. So Linda is no longer responsible for the column that she had before. She moves over to Richard's column. And that's because the activities go with position, not so much people. Sometimes they do, but people move around, positions don't tend to move around as much. So there's various ways to identify this. You can see the major responsibilities are the R's, the supports. You can even get into levels of like academic support or technology support or whatever. But one thing that you must pay attention to, however you can load it, have it as primary person, secondary person, responsible person, support, whatever coding you use, you can only have one person who is responsible. In other words, in this case, you cannot make, in the first one, identify target customers, Richard and Dan. What this does is if I'm the project manager and I want to find out how that part of the project's going, I go talk to Richard. I don't talk to Dave. I don't talk to Linda. Don't talk to Dan. The person responsible is Richard. Richard looks at his list. Oh, I am the person responsible. Very clearly identifies who's responsible for what. Richard is also responsible for the draft questionnaire. Richard is not responsible for the pilot test questionnaire. And it's very easy to see for the people to know what they're responsible for. And also, if I'm a brand new project manager taking over this project, I can look at this and I can say, oh, Elizabeth, how's the printing coming from the questionnaire? And Elizabeth says, well, I can't print it because it hasn't been finalized. So I go over to Richard and say, Richard. And Richard says, we'll have it finalized later today. Fine. So you can very easily see who is responsible for what, but also those people understand, oh, if I ask Linda, are you going to help with mailing out questionnaires? Actually, the answer is no, because Linda is not a support person for that. Linda is working on identifying the customers, the pilot questionnaire, the finalized questionnaire, analyzing the results, and helping with the draft report. So it makes things very clear. You should include this in your project report, again, if you're taking a course that has a project. Here's just another way of identifying it for the conveyor belt project. Again, one is the responsible person, two is support, consulting, notification, and approval. So it just is a little more refined than just saying responsible, support. What kind of support? That could be admin support. Again, sometimes people are just consulting, or sometimes people just need to know about it. So manufacturing simply needs to know about the documentation and the manufacturing. Sorry, about the prototypes. So documentation needs to know about the prototypes, and manufacturing needs to be know about the prototypes. But they just need to be notified about it. They don't do approval. Who does approval on this particular case? For the design, people approve the integrated acceptance test. Also, the quality assurance people need to approve it, and the manufacturing people need to approve it. Assembly and testing do not. Again, communication plan is important. One of the things with project management, you have what I call horizontal and vertical communication, especially so you have horizontal within the team, even to external parties like your stakeholders and potentially the customer. You also have vertical where you need to report to, say, senior management. And you need to report to them in various ways, either using agile project management, which would be frequent, short pieces of information, or sometimes have a major review if, say, it's a very large project and you need to go into more detail to keep people up to date. But these days, the communication needs to be verbal, it needs to be visual, it needs to be written in some cases, especially if it's very technical. So you need to have a communication plan. Who you communicate with, how often, in what form. So you can, again, with your stakeholders, identifying the target groups, what information does people need, where do you get the information, how do you disseminate it, which is what I was just mentioning, hard copy, email, teleconferencing, SharePoint, etc. Database programs, programs like Basecamp, Microsoft Project, etc. And again, who is responsible for sending out the information? You have to be careful with this. If somebody's sending out information and they're not authorized for that, that can cause all kinds of disruptions. So you need to have somebody responsible for the responsible for that, and pay attention to the timing so it comes out in a timely manner. And of course, you need to keep people satisfied, keep them informed, and sometimes just provide general information. You know, if it's a large project for organization, people might just like to know what's going on. Here's again a communication plan that's I know when I teach the public relations students that this would be very important to those people to understand how it's disseminated, and even the rest of the students need to understand. You see, it's got the frequency, it's got the method, who provides it, who you're providing it to, and those are the major points from chapter number 4.